All right, good morning. Today we are going to finish our Bessie Coleman book first, and then I have a video for you to watch so that you can figure out the two things that you need to do today. Okay, I won't explain that here because I do have a video for you to watch about that. All right, so the last thing we read about Bessie Coleman was she was going off to France, and hold on. Yes, she wanted to be somebody. Someday I'll be a pilot, small step by small step. So let's find out what she does. To make better wages, Bessie left the barber shop to work in a chilly restaurant. Now that she had more money to put in the bank, Bessie signed up to take French classes on Michigan Avenue. Bonjour, au revoir, c'est sa vie. I don't know French. Bessie said the new French words over and over in her kitchen as she cooked for her nieces and nephews. She was the favorite aunt who let them play records on her wind-up Victorial. She even gave them money for movies. Young Arthur and Marion and the other Coleman cousins thought their Aunt Bessie was the best aunt in town. On a November day in 1920, Bessie boarded the SS Imperator from a New York City pier and sailed for France. She had her passport in her pocket and some money from her friend, Robert Abbott. Bessie Coleman was 28 years old. So she's had a long, long time of really wanting this dream that she hasn't received yet. In a small town near the Somme River, two Frenchmen ran a famous flying school. Yes, they would teach Bessie how to fly. For 7 months, in a country far from the cotton fields of Texas, Bessie walked 9 miles to the airfield and 9 miles home to the village of Rue. She had no friends to help her, no family, but she wanted to learn to fly. And fly she did. Just like the pilots in the news stories of the Chicago Defender, just like the pilots in the United States who were men and who were white, Bessie Coleman learned the same skills that they knew with courage in her heart. Now, Bessie knew all the words in French and in English for the parts of the small plane she was learning to fly. Cockpit, rudder bar, stick, and struts. She heard the stories about other pilots who crashed their fragile planes, who sometimes lost their lives. But still, she kept walking those long miles to the airfield, 9 miles to her French biplane. Those wings were made of cloth, and 9 miles back to her room in Rue. She would fly high and be somebody, and tell others of her race that she could do the same thing too. From this page right here, I can infer, or I can draw the conclusion that Bessie Coleman is a very, very determined person. And there is lots of text evidence to prove to us that she was very determined. On June 15th, 1921, Bessie Coleman put an important piece of paper in her pocket, an international license to fly. It was the very best license to have. With it, Bessie could fly anywhere in the world. Nobody could say, "You're a Negro woman, you can't fly." But then Bessie headed to Paris and bought a fancy leather coat. Now she was an aviatrix, a trace chick, aviatrix. And ava is the root word for like aviation, like plane or flying. Back home in the USA. So now let's look at this heading right here. Kind of lets me know this part of the story is going to talk about when she goes back to the USA. That September, Bessie Coleman sailed back to the New York harbor. Now she was news, front page news. African American newspapers all over the country had stories about the first person of their race to learn to fly. Always waving, always smiling. Bessie Coleman was an aviatrix with spunk and style. Eager to improve her flying skills for the future air shows, Bessie returned to Europe the next February. For 6 months, she took more lessons in France, Germany, and Holland. Tailspins, banking turns, figure eights, looping the loop. Why do you think her accomplishments made the front page? Yeah, it was a really, really big deal. Not that she was a woman, but especially that she was an African American woman. Then she came home to the U.S. to perform all those daring stunts. Her first air show was on Long Island on September 3rd, 1922, and Brave Bess was a hit. Bessie drew big crowds whenever she flew. Pretty and pretty. Even in a leather helmet and goggles, Bessie wore tall, shiny boots and, of course, her long coat from Paris. In Texas and Tennessee and New York and Illinois, Bessie Coleman told her many fans, "All of us are created equal." And others of her race weren't allowed to buy tickets for the air. If others were not allowed to buy tickets for the air shows, then Bessie refused to fly. Bessie Coleman was a thinker and a talker. She visited dozens of black schools and churches in many states. You can be somebody. You can fly high just like me. Now, Bessie wanted to help other people. She wanted to open a flying school so that others could learn to fly. Not everything was easy for Bessie. Money was still a problem. It was hard to make money flying, and Bessie had to borrow planes to fly in. Finally, Bessie was able to buy her own plane. Her Jenny was a biplane. It wasn't new. It was old and shabby, but it was hers. Then Bessie was in a terrible crash in California. Shortly after her takeoff from Santa Monica, the Jenny's motor stalled and nosedived to the ground. What do you think stalled means? Yeah, so stalled means like it kind of quit running. And the context clues I can use to help if I didn't know that word would be nosed dive to the ground. So I know that it's not a good situation, and if the plane's going down on its own, then it probably quit working. Bessie was in the hospital for 3 long months and didn't fly for a year. With the loss of her own Jenny, Bessie again had to borrow planes for her air shows. Most of the planes were old and not very safe. Bessie knew that flying was a risk, but she thought that it was an important risk on behalf of her race. If you were her, do you think you would fly again after that crash? Do you think she was smart for wanting to fly again? A sad ending. On April 29th, 1926, Bessie Coleman was in Jacksonville, Florida, hundreds of miles away from Waxahachie and hundreds more away from Chicago. She was 34 years old and close to her dream of opening a flying school. That day, Bessie visited every African-American school in the city. She told young people her story. She told them, "You can do something with your life, too." Many of Bessie's fans had tickets for her air show on May 1st. Even her friend Robert Abbott happened to be in town, and when Bessie saw him in a restaurant, she thanked her friend for giving her the chance to fly. The day before Bessie was to fly high for Jacksonville crowd, she and a Texas mechanic, William Wills, were to take a test run in the old shabby plane that Bessie was to use. That morning, Bessie knelt by her plane and said a quiet prayer. Then she let Willis take the controls, and while she sat in the rear seat, Bessie was a safe pilot, but this time she didn't fasten her seatbelt. She wanted to get a better view of the land below, and suddenly something went wrong. The plane went into a tailspin. Bessie fell from her plane down thousands of feet. William Wills died too after the plane crashed on the ground. No one could believe the awful news. Brave Bess, who had come so many miles from the cotton fields of Texas, would never be able to fly again, would never be able to tell others, "You can be somebody too." Goodbye to brave Bess. In Jacksonville, 5,000 people, many of whom had heard Bessie's inspiring words, came to the memorial service to say goodbye. Then Bessie's casket went to Chicago on a train. Up and down State Street there were prayers and tears. A formal funeral was held at the Pilgrim Baptist Church in the big city whose streets Bessie called home. 10,000 people passed by her coffin to pay their respects. They would never forget that Bessie Coleman had shown the world how anyone could fly high. Their Bessie was somebody, all right. Daughter, aunt, walker, reader, dreamer, thinker, student, pilot, speaker, and teacher. Bessie Coleman was all of these. Like her mother Susan, Bessie knew how to plant seeds. Her work in schools and churches was as important as her daring spins and loops in the sky. Across the U.S., some of Bessie's young fans grew up to be pilots. Many others would remember her courage, her smile, and her words. You can do something too. Keep trying. Fly high. How did Bessie's childhood influence the things she did as an adult? So I want you to think about all the things that Bessie did as an adult. She never gave up on her dream. She went to other people and pushed them to not give up on their dream. So how do you think that influenced, like how did her childhood that was really hard influence her adulthood, do you think? Yeah, I think her childhood that was really hard just pushed her to want more as an adult. It said Bessie knew how to plant seeds. Now that's figurative language. They don't really mean that she planted a seed everywhere she went. What do you think it means by she knew how to plant seeds? Yeah, I think it meant like she knew how to give plant seeds in people that they could be somebody, to help them feel more determined, to teach them that they have to work hard at whatever they need. She planted that seed that they could be somebody. Okay, so other day we talked about this was a biography book. And so biography just means, we said it was written about someone else. And so this was written about Bessie by someone else. And we figured out that Bessie said a lot she wanted to be somebody, or there were people that were somebody. What do you think that word somebody meant throughout this book? Why do you think she kept saying somebody? Yeah, I think somebody just means like she wanted to be known. She wanted to make a statement. She wanted to be more than a cotton picker in a field that nobody knew. And she looked up to those people who really pushed out for those things. I also want to talk about the author's message of this book. Why do you, or what do you think the author wanted us to learn? Or what do you think the author's big idea was when he wrote this book? Like, what was his message to us as the reader? What did he want us to understand from Bessie? The big idea. I think he wanted us to learn about determination, maybe. But it says here that Bessie's life proves one life can change many others. And so I think they also want us to know that you can inspire others by the way you live your life. Everybody deserves the chance to become somebody. And so that's what they meant by planting those seeds. She planted those seeds so they would become somebody. So if you just thought that the message of this book was around determination or not giving up or working towards your dreams or something of that, you were right on target.